Welcome to HOA Backfired. This one escalated fast in the front yard. I am standing in my driveway at 6 in the morning, still holding my work glove in one hand, and Kimberly Carter is already yelling at me about a parking violation I did not commit. She is the board secretary for Briarwood HOA here in Syracuse, New York, and she has a clipboard, a tow yard claim ticket booklet she keeps flipping through, and an expression that says she has been waiting for this moment since she woke up. I moved to this neighborhood 8 months ago because the rent was stable, and I needed something close to the interstate for my job as a regional field technician. I am always on a deadline, my employer is watching my attendance, and one more late arrival ends my probation. The HOA sold itself as low-key and professional. That lasted exactly until a neighbor reported my car as too loud, and Kimberly turned it into a full parking enforcement crusade. She taps the clipboard against her thigh and says, "You do not get an opinion, you get a fine schedule." I have been hearing that line from her for 2 weeks now, ever since the first notice showed up on my windshield. Behind her, I can see the metal wheel boot lying on the ground like a threat, the kind of prop she brought just to make sure I understood the stakes. I am trying to keep my home insurance stable, and the HOA is pushing me toward a claim with lien threats padded with bogus legal fees and mystery administrative surcharges. The neighborhood is one of those communities where tow vendors are treated like paid muscle, and Kimberly has their direct line on speed dial. I take a breath and ask her to show me the actual rule she is citing, the one that says I cannot park my own car in my own driveway overnight. She does not even blink. She says, "Your paperwork is cute, mine has a letterhead." Then she turns and walks back toward the clubhouse, leaving the boot on my lawn like a warning shot. I know right then that this is not going to be a polite disagreement solved with an email. This is war, and she fired the first round before I even got my coffee. The backstory is simple. 3 weeks ago, a neighbor 2 doors down decided my car was too loud when I left for work at 5 in the morning. I drive a 10-year-old sedan with a factory exhaust. It is not modified, it is not racing, it is just old, and it makes a little noise on a cold start. The complaint went straight to Kimberly, who sits on the board and controls every piece of paperwork that moves through Briarwood HOA. Instead of sending a polite reminder about quiet hours, she turned it into a full parking violation. The notice claimed I was parked in violation of guest parking restrictions, which makes no sense because I was parked in my own driveway. When I called the management company, they told me the portal was down and that I should submit an appeal in writing. I did. 2 days later, Kimberly showed up at my door with a vendor she claimed was there to verify parking compliance and provoke a reaction. The guy had a handheld scanner and spent 15 minutes walking around my car taking photos of the plate, the VIN sticker on the windshield, and the permit decal I had already stuck in the corner. I asked him who authorized the inspection. He pointed at Kimberly and said she was handling enforcement this month. That was escalation step 1. I filed a formal complaint with the management company and got a form letter back saying my appeal was under review. Kimberly responded by attempting a second tow after I put them on notice to stop. I came home one afternoon to find a tow truck backed into my driveway, amber lights flashing, the driver hooking up the wheel lift under my front axle. I ran outside, showed him my registration and my owner documents, and told him he was about to tow a legally parked vehicle from private property. He looked at his phone, made a call, and then unhooked the car without a word. Later that night, Kimberly sent an email to the entire neighborhood saying that certain residents were interfering with authorized compliance actions, and that further violations would result in immediate boot and tow with no advance notice. I kept my voice low, because my trump card needed perfect timing. I had something she did not know about yet, and I was not going to waste it on an email fight. The next morning, I got a call from a local mediator named Rita, who explained how to keep it legally clean. She had worked on a dozen HOA cases in Syracuse, and she knew the playback. She told me to document everything, keep copies of every notice, photograph every interaction, and never lose my temper on camera. She also told me that Briarwood HOA had a history of using tow vendors as intimidation, and that the board secretary position gave Kimberly access to every file and every enforcement decision. If I wanted to win, I needed proof that she was exceeding her authority and violating the association bylaws. Rita became my ally. She reviewed the notices Kimberly had sent and pointed out that none of them cited a specific rule number or included a hearing date. That was a red flag. In New York, an HOA has to follow its own procedures, and if the procedures are not published or not followed, the fines are unenforceable. I started building my case. I went back through my doorbell camera footage and found the night Kimberly had come by to inspect my car. The timestamp was 2 in the morning, and the video showed her walking up my driveway with a flashlight, circling my car, and taking photos of the permit decal and the license plate. She was on my property without permission, in the middle of the night, clearly trying to find something to use against me. That was my evidence type, a doorbell video capturing her intimidation and the exact words she used. I saved the file, backed it up, and kept it off the cloud so she could not claim I doctored it. 2 days later, Kimberly issued another notice. This one was different. It was printed on Briarwood HOA letterhead, and it claimed I had parked overnight in a fire lane, which was a lie. My driveway is nowhere near a fire lane. The notice included a fine schedule that added up to $300, plus an administrative surcharge of $75, plus a lien filing fee if I did not pay within 10 days. At the bottom, in small print, it said that failure to comply would result in boot and tow authorization, and that I waived my right to appeal by parking in violation. I read it twice and realized this was Kimberly's playbook. She was stacking fees and legal threats to force me into paying before I could fight back. I called Rita again. She told me to file a records complaint with the management company and demand a copy of the parking enforcement policy, the board resolution authorizing the fines, and the contract with the tow vendor. She said if Briarwood could not produce those documents, the entire enforcement program was invalid. I drafted the complaint that night, attached screenshots of the notices, included the doorbell video as a file link, and sent it certified mail to the management company with a copy to the board president. I kept a copy for myself in a Ziploc bag, the same kind of Ziploc bag Kimberly had shown up with a week earlier, claiming it held a torn permit backing that proved I had removed my guest decal. She never let me see inside the bag, and I never believed her story, but I kept the detail in mind because it was exactly the kind of cheap trick she would pull. The next day, I got a response. It was not from the management company. It was from Kimberly, sent from her personal email, and it said that my records request was denied because the portal was down and my appeal did not exist. She claimed that I had failed to submit the appeal during the 14-day window and that the fines were now final and subject to lien. I forwarded the email to Rita, who told me that was retaliation and that I should document it as part of the complaint. She also told me that the portal being down was not a valid excuse under New York law and that the HOA had to accept appeals in any written format, including email and certified mail. I was done being polite. I sent a reply to Kimberly with the board president and the management company copied. I said that I had submitted my appeal on time, that I had proof of delivery, that the parking enforcement policy had never been published to homeowners, and that I was requesting an immediate hearing to contest the fines. I also said that if the boot and tow threats continued, I would file a complaint with the state attorney general and pursue damages for harassment and trespass. I hit send and waited. The response came 30 minutes later. It was not an email, it was a vendor at my door. Again, this time with a boot clamp in his hand and a work order that said he was authorized to immobilize my vehicle pending payment of outstanding fines. I asked him to show me the authorization. He handed me a printout with no signature, no date, and no case number. It just said boot and tow authorized by board secretary. I told him I was not letting him touch my car and that I had already filed a formal appeal. He shrugged and said he was just doing his job. Then he walked back to his truck, tossed the boot clamp in the back, and drove off. I took a photo of the work order and sent it to Rita with a note that said, "This is escalating fast." Rita called me that night and told me we needed to move faster. She said Kimberly was clearly trying to force a reaction, either to get me to pay the fines or to provoke me into doing something she could use against me. She suggested I attend the next board meeting and demand answers in person. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at the clubhouse, and it was open to all homeowners under the bylaws. I marked it on my calendar and started preparing. I printed copies of every notice, every email, every photo, and every document I had. I put them in a binder with tabs and a cover page. I also made a second copy of the doorbell video and saved it to a thumb drive in case the internet was down at the meeting. The week dragged. I kept expecting another tow attempt or another boot threat, but nothing came. Kimberly went quiet, which made me more nervous than her emails ever did. I checked my driveway every morning before work and every evening when I got home. I started parking my car in the garage, even though it meant I had to move boxes and tools to make space. I could not afford to lose a day of work because my car was impounded, and I definitely could not afford the tow yard fees Briarwood was threatening. Thursday finally arrived. I left work early, which cost me an hour of pay and a conversation with my supervisor about my attendance record. I told him it was a legal matter and that I would make up the time over the weekend. He was not happy, but he let it slide. I drove straight to the clubhouse, arriving 15 minutes before the meeting started. The parking lot was nearly empty. I saw Kimberly's car near the entrance, a late-model sedan with a Briarwood HOA parking placard on the dash. I parked in a guest spot, grabbed my binder, and walked inside. The clubhouse lobby was small and dated, with tile floors, fluorescent lights, and a bulletin board covered in flyers for community events. A security guard was hovering near the door, a guy in his 50s wearing a polo shirt and a radio on his belt. He nodded at me as I walked past. I could hear voices coming from the meeting room down the hall. I followed the sound and found the board already seated at a folding table in front of a dozen empty chairs. Kimberly was at the far end of the table, her tow yard claim ticket booklet open in front of her, a pen in her hand. She looked up when I walked in and her expression did not change. I took a seat in the front row and set my binder on my lap. The board president, an older man with glasses and a tie, called the meeting to order and started with routine business. I waded through budget updates, landscaping complaints, and a discussion about holiday decorations. Finally, he asked if there was any new business from homeowners. I raised my hand. He called on me, and I stood up. I introduced myself, gave my address, and said I was there to contest the parking fines and boot and tow threats issued by the board secretary. I opened my binder and started walking through the timeline. I showed the first notice, the second notice, the boot work order, the tow truck photos, and the email where Kimberly denied my appeal. I kept my tone calm and factual. I did not accuse anyone of lying. I just pointed out that none of the notices cited a specific rule, none of them included a hearing date, and none of them had been issued under a published enforcement policy. Kimberly interrupted me. She said, "You do not get an opinion, you get a fine schedule." Same line, same tone. I kept going. I said that I had requested a copy of the parking enforcement policy and the tow vendor contract, and that the management company had not responded. I said that under New York law, the HOA was required to follow its own procedures and publish its rules to all homeowners. I said that if Briarwood could not produce the policy, the fines were unenforceable. The board president looked uncomfortable. He glanced at Kimberly and asked if she had a copy of the policy. She said it was in the files and that she would provide it after the meeting. I said I needed it now because the fines were due in 3 days and I could not appeal something I had never seen. The president asked her again. She hesitated, then said the policy was being updated and that the current version was not final. That was the moment I knew I had her. I asked if that meant there was no adopted policy in place. She said the board had approved enforcement guidelines at a previous meeting and that those guidelines were sufficient. I asked when the meeting happened and whether it was properly noticed to homeowners. She said it was an executive session and that the minutes were confidential. I said that was a violation of the open meetings law and that fines issued under a secret policy were void. The room got very quiet. The board president asked Kimberly to explain the executive session vote. She said it was for legal strategy and that it did not need to be disclosed. I said that was not how the law worked and that enforcement policies were not legal strategy. I said that if the board wanted to fine me, they needed to show me the rule I violated, the resolution authorizing the fine, and the process for appealing. I said I had been asking for those documents for 3 weeks and that all I had gotten were threats and vendor visits. The president looked at the other board members. No one spoke. Finally, he said that the board would table my fines pending a review of the enforcement policy and that Kimberly would provide the requested documents within 7 days. Kimberly started to argue, but he cut her off. He said the board would revisit the issue at the next meeting and that no further enforcement actions would be taken until the policy was published. I thanked him and sat down. Kimberly was staring at me with an expression that could have melted steel. I did not look at her. I just closed my binder and waited for the meeting to end. When it finally did, I walked out of the clubhouse and got in my car. I sat there for a minute, letting the adrenaline drain, and then I drove home. I knew this was not over. Kimberly was not the type to back down just because the board president told her to pause. She was going to escalate, and I needed to be ready. The next morning, I got a text from Rita. She said she had heard from another homeowner that Kimberly was planning to push the fines through anyway and that she was telling people the board president did not have the authority to override her enforcement decisions. Rita said that was not true, but that it did not matter if Kimberly believed it. She told me to keep documenting and to be ready for another confrontation. She was right. 2 days later, I came home from work to find a chalk mark on my driveway, a thick white line drawn across the asphalt about 6 inches from my rear bumper. I recognized it immediately. It was the kind of mark tow companies use to prove a car has not moved. If the mark was still aligned the next day, they could claim the car had been parked overnight in violation of some imaginary rule. I took photos of the mark from 3 angles, including a close-up that showed the chalk dust still fresh on the pavement. Then I set up my phone on a tripod inside my garage and pointed the camera at the driveway. I was not going to let Kimberly manufacture evidence. The next morning, I checked the footage. The car had not moved. The chalk mark was exactly where I had left it. But when I went outside, the mark was gone. Someone had erased it, and in its place was a new notice on my windshield. This one claimed I had parked overnight in violation of guest parking restrictions and that I owed a fine of $200 plus fees. It was dated the previous night, and it was signed by Kimberly. I called Rita immediately. I told her what happened and sent her the photos and the video. She laughed, which surprised me. She said this was perfect. She said Kimberly had just handed me proof that she was fabricating violations, and that the timestamp on my video would show the car had not moved and that someone had tampered with the chalk mark. She told me to save everything and to file a formal complaint with the management company alleging fraud and harassment. I drafted the complaint that afternoon. I included the photos, the video link, the new notice, and a timeline showing that Kimberly had issued the fine before the chalk mark could have proven anything. I sent it to the management company, the board president, and the HOA attorney with a cover letter demanding an immediate investigation and a retraction of all fines. I also said that if the HOA did not take action, I would file a lawsuit for defamation, harassment, and abuse of process. The response came faster than I expected. The management company called me the next day and said they were scheduling an emergency board meeting to review my complaint. They said the meeting would be held at their office, not at the clubhouse, and that I was invited to attend and present my evidence. They also said that Kimberly had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. I felt a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. Maybe this was actually going to work. Maybe the system was going to hold her accountable. But I was not naive. I knew Kimberly still had allies on the board, and I knew she was not going to go quietly. I spent the next 2 days preparing for the meeting. I printed new copies of everything, organized my evidence into a clear timeline, and rehearsed my presentation. Rita offered to come with me as a witness, and I accepted. I needed someone in my corner who understood the legal side. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 10 in the morning. I took a personal day from work, which meant burning another day of leave I could not afford to lose. My supervisor was getting impatient, and I could feel the probation deadline creeping closer. But I had no choice. If I did not fight this now, Kimberly was going to bury me in fines and liens, and I would lose everything I had worked for. Rita and I arrived at the management company office 15 minutes early. The lobby was small and plain, with a reception desk, a few chairs, and a coffee maker that looked like it had not been cleaned in years. The receptionist told us the board was already in the conference room and that we should wait until they were ready. We sat down, and I flipped through my binder one more time, checking that everything was in order. 10 minutes later, the receptionist waved us back. We walked down a short hallway and into a conference room with a long table, a projector screen, and a whiteboard covered in old marker smudges. The board was seated on one side of the table. The president was there, along with 2 other board members I recognized from the clubhouse meeting. Kimberly was not in the room, but I could see her through the glass door, standing in the hallway with her arms crossed, watching. The president asked me to present my case. I stood up, connected my laptop to the projector, and walked through the timeline. I showed the original noise complaint, the first parking notice, the tow truck incident, the boot threat, the chalk mark photos, and the doorbell video. I played the video for the board, and I watched their faces as they saw Kimberly walking up my driveway at 2 in the morning with a flashlight. When the video ended, the room was silent. I kept going. I showed the notice she had issued after erasing the chalk mark, and I pointed out that the timestamp proved she had fabricated the violation. I showed the emails where she denied my appeal and claimed the portal was down. I showed the work orders from the tow vendor with no signature and no authorization. I showed the fee schedule with the mystery administrative surcharges. And then I showed the records request I had sent to the management company asking for the parking enforcement policy, the board resolution, and the tow vendor contract. I said, I have been asking for these documents for a month. I still have not received them. If Briarwood HOA is going to fine me, boot my car, and threaten me with liens, I deserve to see the rules I am accused of violating. I deserve a hearing. I deserve due process. And I deserve to be treated like a homeowner, not a target. The president asked the management company representative if they had the documents. The representative, a woman in a blazer with a stack of files in front of her, shuffled through the papers and said she had a draft policy but no adopted resolution. She said the tow vendor contract was still being finalized and that there was no signed agreement on file. She said the administrative surcharges were standard fees, but that she could not find a board resolution authorizing them. I said, so you are telling me that Briarwood has been issuing fines, threatening tows, and adding fees under a policy that was never adopted and a contract that does not exist? The representative did not answer. The president looked at the other board members. One of them, a man in his 60s, said, "This is a mess. We need to fix this." The president turned to me and said the board would retract all fines and notices issued under the unpublished policy. He said the HOA would draft a new parking enforcement policy, publish it to all homeowners, and hold a comment period before adopting it. He said Kimberly would no longer be handling enforcement and that her role as board secretary would be reviewed. He also said the HOA would issue a written apology and confirm that I had no outstanding fines or fees. I said, I appreciate that. But I also want a firm no-contact directive. I do not want Kimberly or any vendor she hires coming to my property without a valid documented reason. And I want it in writing. The president nodded. He said the board would issue a fine waiver in writing with a firm no-contact directive and that it would be delivered to me within 48 hours. He asked if there was anything else. I glanced at Rita, and she shook her head. I said that was all I needed for now, but that I reserved the right to pursue further action if the harassment continued. The president thanked me for bringing the issue to their attention and said the meeting was adjourned. I packed up my laptop, grabbed my binder, and walked out. Kimberly was still in the hallway, and as I passed her, she said, "Your paperwork is cute. Mine has a letterhead. Same line, same smug tone." But this time, I had an answer. I stopped and turned to face her. I said, "Your letterhead does not mean anything if the policy behind it does not exist. The board just confirmed that, so maybe you should focus on learning the rules before you try to enforce them." Her face went red. She opened her mouth to respond, but Rita touched my arm and said, "Let's go." We walked past her and out to the parking lot. I did not look back. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more HOA drama where the homeowner fights back and wins. 2 days later, I received the waiver and the no-contact directive in the mail. It was on Briarwood HOA letterhead, signed by the board president, and it stated that all fines and fees issued to me under the parking enforcement program were void and that no further enforcement actions would be taken without a properly noticed hearing. It also said that Kimberly Carter was prohibited from contacting me or entering my property for any reason related to HOA business. I made 3 copies and filed the original in my binder. I thought that was the end of it. But Kimberly was not done yet. A week later, I got a call from Rita. She said another homeowner had reached out to her with a similar complaint. Kimberly had targeted them with the same tactics: fake parking violations, boot threats, mystery fees, and denials of appeal. Rita said the homeowner had doorbell footage showing Kimberly on their property at night, just like mine. She said there were at least 3 other cases, maybe more, and that it looked like Kimberly had been running a personal enforcement campaign for months. Rita suggested we organize a group complaint and file it with the state attorney general. She said that if Kimberly had been systematically violating homeowner rights, the AG might open an investigation. I agreed, and over the next 2 weeks, Rita and I worked with the other homeowners to compile evidence. We had videos, emails, notices, work orders, and timelines. We had proof that Kimberly had been issuing fines under a non-existent policy, using tow vendors without proper authorization, and retaliating against anyone who questioned her. We filed the complaint in early December. The AG's office acknowledged receipt and said they would review it. I did not expect a fast response, but I felt better knowing it was on the record. In the meantime, the board scheduled a special meeting to adopt a new parking enforcement policy. The meeting was properly noticed, open to all homeowners, and held at the clubhouse. I attended, along with Rita and 2 of the other homeowners who had filed complaints. The board presented a draft policy that included clear rules, a defined appeals process, and a requirement that all enforcement actions be documented and reviewed by the full board. The policy also said that no tow vendor could be authorized without a signed contract approved by the membership. During the comment period, I stood up and said I supported the policy, but that I wanted one additional safeguard. an annual audit of all fines and enforcement actions with the results published to homeowners. I said that transparency was the only way to prevent future abuse. Several other homeowners agreed, and the board added the audit requirement to the policy. The policy was adopted unanimously, and it was published to all homeowners the following week. Kimberly did not attend the meeting. In fact, I had not seen her since the management company confrontation. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had resigned from the board and moved out of state. I did not know if that was true, and I did not care. She was gone, and that was enough. But the story was not over yet, because there was still one piece of the puzzle I had not deployed. The doorbell video I had shown the board was damning, but it was not the only evidence I had. I had also been gathering documents, and one of them was a receipt from the tow yard Kimberly had been using. The receipt was for a tow that had been billed to Briarwood HOA, but never actually performed. The work order had my address on it, along with a date and time that I could prove I was out of town. The receipt showed that the tow company had charged the HOA $350 for a tow that never happened, and that Kimberly had approved the payment. I had been holding on to that receipt, waiting for the right moment. And when the AG's office called me in January to schedule an interview as part of their investigation, I knew the moment had arrived. I met with the investigator at a coffee shop near downtown Syracuse. I brought my binder, my thumb drives, and the tow yard receipt. I walked him through the entire timeline, from the noise complaint to the chalk mark to the management company meeting. And then I showed him the receipt. I said, "This is proof that Kimberly was not just harassing homeowners. She was defrauding the HOA. She authorized a tow that never happened, and the HOA paid for it. I do not know if she got a kickback, but I know the tow company charged us, and she approved it without verifying the work was done." The investigator took notes and asked if I had any other documents showing similar transactions. I said I did not have access to the HOA financials, but that the management company should have records of every payment to the tow vendor. He said he would follow up with them. 2 months later, the AG's office released a public statement saying they had opened a formal investigation into Briarwood HOA's enforcement practices. The statement did not name Kimberly, but it said the investigation had uncovered evidence of improper fines, unauthorized vendor contracts, and possible financial misconduct. The statement also said the AG was working with the management company to ensure compliance with state HOA laws and that affected homeowners would be notified of their rights to seek restitution. I got a letter from the management company a week later. It said that the HOA had conducted an internal audit and discovered multiple improper payments to the tow vendor, including the one I had flagged. The letter said the HOA was terminating its relationship with the vendor and pursuing reimbursement. It also said the board had voted to remove Kimberly from all positions effective immediately and that she was permanently banned from serving on the board or any committee. The final piece came in March. The board held a mandatory meeting to present the audit results and the new enforcement policy. I attended, along with most of the neighborhood. The board president stood at the front of the room and read a statement. He said the audit had found that Kimberly had issued fines totaling over $15,000 under a policy that was never adopted, that she had authorized tows without proper board approval, and that she had approved vendor payments for work that was not performed. He said the HOA was refunding all improper fines, publishing the new policy with timelines to all homeowners, and implementing quarterly audits to prevent future abuse. He also said that Kimberly had been referred to local law enforcement for possible fraud charges, and that the HOA was cooperating fully with the investigation. The room was silent. Then someone in the back started clapping, and within seconds the entire room erupted in applause. I sat there, holding my binder, and let the moment wash over me. It had taken 4 months, but I had won. The aftermath was quieter. I got my refund check in April, along with a formal apology from the board. The new parking policy was clear, fair, and actually enforceable. The quarterly audits became a regular agenda item, and the board started publishing meeting minutes online so homeowners could see what was happening. The neighborhood felt different. People were more engaged, more willing to speak up, and less afraid of retaliation. I kept my job. My supervisor noticed that I stopped missing time for legal meetings, and my attendance record improved. I made it through probation and got a small raise in June. I kept the binder on a shelf in my garage, just in case, but I have not had to open it since the final board meeting. Rita and I stayed in touch. She helped 2 more homeowners fight similar cases in other Syracuse neighborhoods, and she started offering free workshops on HOA rights. I attended one of them and told my story to a room full of people who were dealing with their own board nightmares. It felt good to turn my experience into something useful. As for Kimberly, I heard she was charged with theft by deception and pled guilty to a lesser charge. She paid restitution to the HOA and was banned from serving on any board in New York for 10 years. I do not know where she ended up, and I do not care. She is out of my life, and that is all that matters. The funny thing is, the whole mess started with a noise complaint about my car. And you know what the board did after they adopted the new policy? They sent a survey to all homeowners asking for feedback on quiet hours and vehicle noise. Turns out, most people did not care about my car. The complaint had come from one neighbor who had a personal grudge, and Kimberly had weaponized it because she could. When the survey results came back, the board decided not to adopt any new noise restrictions. They said the existing rules were fine and that enforcement should focus on real violations, not personal vendettas. I still drive that same 10-year-old sedan. It still makes a little noise on cold mornings. And no one has complained since. I learned a lot from that fight. I learned that HOAs only have the power you give them. I learned that documentation is everything. I learned that the system works, but only if you force it to. And I learned that standing up for yourself, even when it is hard, even when it costs you time and money and sleep, is worth it in the end. Because the alternative is letting people like Kimberly win. And I was not going to let that happen. So if you are in a fight with your HOA, my advice is this. Keep your receipts, know your rights, and do not back down. They are counting on you to give up. Prove them wrong. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.